Imagine you're watching a runaway trolley barreling down the tracks at 60 kilometers per hour. You notice that towards the end of the track, there are 5 workers who cannot escape, and when the trolley hurtles down that path, they will die. But you happen to be standing at a switch where you could divert the trolley onto another track. But on the second track, there's 1 worker who would die. What would you do? Even if you don't feel comfortable talking with a pre-recorded video, just think about your answer. Got your answer? I personally would pull the switch. And in multiple studies, the majority of people, when given this scenario above, responded that they would sacrifice 1 person to save more people. They subconsciously apply a version of consequentialism perspective, where the morally right act is one that will produce a good outcome. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that holds that the consequence of one's actions is the ultimate basis for any judgment about the rightness or wrongness of that conduct. The trolley problem, for those unfamiliar, is an ethical and psychological dilemma which contrasts the sacrifice of 1 person for a larger number of people. This dilemma can be reflected in situations in the 21st century, ranging from the coronavirus to lead in tap water and everything in between the plethora of modern-day crises that we face. When looking at these present-day situations, we can see a vast difference in how they're being treated compared to how people reacted to the classic trolley dilemma. There are numerous alarming global challenges that will one day affect every single person on this planet, including but not limited to the climate crisis, overfishing, overpopulation, pollution. And yet, humankind has chosen to focus on less pressing issues like the 4th Industrial Revolution, space tourism, growing the economy, and sacrificing the lives and well-being of the larger population for a small group of people. Like the trolley problem, there is no right or completely moral response when solving real issues, since unfortunately we do not live in utopia. We do not live in the wizarding world. But let's get serious. Reviewing this current state of world through some rather large numbers. From 1901 to 2010, the global average sea level rose by 19 centimeters as oceans expanded due to warming and ice melting, destroying the habitats of the now endangered polar bears. 9.2% of the world, or 689 million people, live in extreme poverty, on $1.90 or less a day. In 2019, the global emissions of energy-related carbon dioxide totaled 33.1 billion metric tons. There are currently 849 million undernourished people in the world. But there's also space tourism and developing technologies in the 4th Industrial Revolution, and I'm sure almost everyone has seen this video with a whopping 28 million views. But have you seen something like these pictures showing the aftermath of the Amazon fires? Humans have been more focused into moving into the future and solving pre-existing problems. So what do we do? Today, I would like to offer an idea that isn't necessarily perfect and is easier said than done. The world should focus on solving pre-existing problems that affect the populace over developing new ideas. In other words, we should stay partially true to the consequentialism philosophy, as in reality, there are numbers of more complex sacrificial dilemmas similar to the trolley problem in real life. Although it may seem like a naive or obvious thought, it is not reflected in the current state of the world. This idea can be applied to one of the more pressing issues that I am passionate about, the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a term used to describe global warming and the climate change and their consequences. About 1 year ago, news spread that we had 10 years to prevent irreversible damage due to climate change. And many people liked, shared, and reposted this information on social media platforms, and environmental activists like Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot created a short film discussing the need to protect, restore, and use nature to tackle the climate crisis. The film also connected with the global strike led by youth in September of 2019. The strike on September 20th was one of the largest climate strikes in history, where they protested to demand action to be taken to climate change. Yet, over a year has passed, and amidst the pandemic, this problem has not been given the attention attention and awareness it should have, despite the urgent need for solutions. Like many others, I always knew that climate change was an issue, but it was through multiple projects, research, and opportunities, looking at how human and natural systems interact in geography, researching the direct effects of Canada's revolution to the environment in history, applying blockchain technology to account for CO2 emissions through a hackathon, joining Fridays for Future, and taking a course in environmental science currently, did I recognize some ramifications of climate change and the patterns of causes. I realized we needed to switch. It's human activity that has led to the increase in CO2 emissions, ultimately warming the planet. Climate change affects everyone, but those with lower socioeconomic status in developing countries, like families and children, see the effects more because developing countries often lack the money and resources to combat the aftermath of these disasters. Developing countries already have pre-existing issues, like lower crop yields, higher rates of water and food insecurity, lower biodiversity, and more extreme natural disasters such as major coastal flooding. And those who face these effects aren't even the largest contributors to CO2 emissions. One of the main contributors to carbon emissions are industries, including fossil fuels, plastics, airlines, automobiles, who are desperate for an economic advantage that was lost at the start of the pandemic. There's a serious risk that polluters can emerge from this crisis bolder and potentially more profitable than ever, says Lucas Ross, a senior policy analyst at Friends of the Earth. In developed countries, burning of fossil fuels releases the most CO2 emissions. The burning of fossil fuels occurs for day-to-day activities and in various industries. Energy consumption contributes to approximately 73% of the greenhouse gas emissions worldwide. Another huge contributor to carbon emissions are the illegal loggers in the Amazon. Throughout the past year, many loggers and farmers have cleared large amounts of land for personal use. Farmers are burning the forest for the sake of their businesses, and Brazil is one of the largest beef exporters, and burning the forest means more land for cattle ranching. The Brazilian government has dismantled environmental protection laws and agencies so that these individuals who burn the forest can do it freely and use that land for their personal use without being held accountable for their destructive actions. This mass deforestation has resulted in the Amazon forest fires with over 1 million hectares of forest being burnt down. One of the problems is that Amazon is one of the largest tropical rainforests, which serves as a habitat for populations of ecosystems and species. The fires could potentially cause an increase in endangered species and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's one of the largest CO2 reservoirs, and burning them all in a short period of time will speed up the effects of global warming. By now, I hope you've seen a pattern of what causes climate change. Human activity, specifically for the benefit of one through economic growth, wants, and convenience. And if you don't believe me, believe in this graph. The annual rate of increase in atmospheric carbon over the past 60 years is about 100 times faster than the previous natural increases, such as those that occurred at the end of the last ice age, 11,000 to 17,000 years ago. This increase of carbon dioxide emissions is during the Industrial Revolution and is increasing as we speak. We have been placed in a trolley dilemma predicament. The climate crisis trolley is coming fast, and we have to make a decision. Do we sacrifice economic growth, wants, convenience as the largest contributors of CO2 emissions, or do we go down the track we are heading and selfishly sacrifice the 5 people representing the majority of the world? According to the United Nations climate scientist in 2019, we need approximately $300 billion USD to stop the rise of greenhouse gases and about 20 years of time to fix global warming. Bloomberg has made the comparison that $300 billion USD being the gross domestic product of Chile or the world's military spending every 60 days. It's plausible, and it's possible. Now, what will happen if we don't switch the track? What happens if we don't sacrifice economic growth and continue to exploit the environment? Well, the average world temperature will continue to rise due to the CO2 emissions and the greenhouse gas effect. From the WWF organization, climate change will result in rising sea levels that could impact 1 billion people by the year 2050. The Arctic could be ice-free, destroying the habitats of Arctic species, and we will lose one of our largest freshwater reservoirs. Flooding. Global warming increases the risk of more precipitation that leads to flooding. Heat waves will become more frequent and severe globally, affecting hundreds of millions or even billions of people if we don't act. And that's just a few effects. My generation, those with a lower socioeconomic status, and people who have a close relationship with the environment, like the indigenous people, will suffer and experience these effects firsthand. But it's not too late to switch the track. Like in the original Trolley poem, you have to take action. You can't just sit back and hope someone else switches the track for you, your children, your family, my generation who are merely teenagers, and our future. How do you switch the track? On the international level, it is up to the world leaders that we have the choice to elect who are involved in the Paris Agreement. They have to work together to eliminate the release of heat-trapping carbon by 2050 and ideally 2040. To do this, they will need to strengthen their commitments, or better yet, to cut emissions over time. You can help voice your opinion through social media or through elected officials by sending a message to them that you care about climate change. On the individual level, pulling the switch takes effort. It does. But there are 3 main ways you can reduce your carbon footprint from transportation, energy, and consumption of goods. These decisions that you make can seem insignificant, but they aren't. Try to make a switch to renewable energy. Find different ways to commute to places like public transportation, biking, walking, carpooling, or investing in an electric car. Buy only what you need. These few things can drastically decrease your carbon footprint if you can make that switch. To the large corporations and companies that are not going to watch this, don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing on technology or the economy, but I believe we are not using technology enough to help solve our pre-existing issues. We need to change, and life is more than about money. We need to switch the track and temporarily sacrifice economic growth, technological growth, and our wants for the well-being of the world. The climate crisis is only one of the thousands of trolleys barreling towards humanity. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk, and I hope you switch the track.